Hello everyone, my name is Chris Titley and welcome to the Fintech Australia podcast. The Fintech Australia podcast takes listeners on a deep dive across the fintech industry in Australia, focusing on the challenges, opportunities and big stories our community faces. Let's get to today's episode. Hi, it's Chris Titley here, and as part of the Fintech Australia podcast series, I'm joined by Scott Hayes, a CFO of Mendoza. Scott, joining us from the other side of the world in Boston. Is that right, Scott?
Certainly is, Chris. It's it's 8:30 on a Monday evening here, and you're already enjoying Tuesday.
So I am, and it's a beautiful 30-degree day here in Brisbane. A little bit on the humidity side, which is not so good for the Brisbaneites. You know, we're so used to this lovely heat, but then we get the humidity, people just run away. But nonetheless, a lovely, lovely day. Scott, let's talk about fintech, your involvement in fintech, how it all began, and what ended you up in Boston.
Yeah, no. So just to start with, as they say over here, I'm a recovering banker. Yep. I was a global corporate institutional banker for 25 years. I lived and worked in Melbourne, Sydney, Dublin and London. I've always been at the forefront of, relationships and also credit structuring across all industries. But fintech was definitely one of them. So I've been across the financial service industries for a long time. I've been a financial institutions banker, natural resources, agri-tech, and just general tech. So that's my background. Why did I move to Boston? Well, my wife got a great opportunity to come over here and head up an Australian company on the east coast of America. So the timing for us was right. Our kids were 5 and 9 at the time. My wife's also Irish, so the chance to come to a city in America, which is 5 hours from home and also closer to the other side of the family, was, too good an opportunity to pass up. And so we made the move in June 2019.
There you go. And the fund that you work for, Mendoza Ventures, can you talk a little bit about that and your relationship, and then obviously being in Boston, what the fund does?
Yeah, so interestingly, Mendoza Ventures is a fintech AI cybersecurity fund. So we're a specialist. It plays to our strengths. It was born out of the fact that Adrian Mendoza, obviously where the name comes from, and Senator Mendoza, who are the GPs, they were founders in the Boston ecosystem. They just ran and said, you know what, we could probably do a better job here. And they looked around too, Adrian Mendoza is a great success story in that he's a Mexican-American. His parents were immigrants. He grew up in LA. He went to Harvard and studied architecture, and at that time was the dot-com boom. He soon worked out while on his side hustle that making websites and being in the tech industry is more lucrative than being an architect. So he spent 20 years within that whole ecosystem as was an entrepreneur in residence at IBM and John Hancock and financial products. So, so that, really gets to the thrust of Mendoza Ventures. He's a technologist at heart, but he's worked in financial institutions. Senator, the GP, has, enterprise sales. Adam Kerr, the other senior partner, he comes from an asset-backed background, like the big boys like State Street and Fidelity. And so he brings that financial now, and we've got a senior partner in our new San Francisco office, Asia Bradley, and she's been a founder herself in in fintech infrastructure, companies like Synapse and a neobank for African Americans. So this is the skill set that Mendoza Ventures has, and this is where we play. Our model's a little bit different too. So when Adrian had his second exit, he looked around and he had a lot of people come to him and say, "Hey, I invested in you. I really hope you did well." And he said, "Well, I had no idea. This is the black box of VC where LPs were never kept at a distance. You went via the fund, and the fund, didn't let you know who the investors were. And so, out of Fund 1, Adrian's thesis was, let's get some LPs that can actively help these companies and help de-risk them. And that's, born our model. So our model is a little bit different. We're a high conviction fund. We have 12 opportunities. We create this network effect. We do 3 months due diligence, and we get our LPs to actively help. So, that's probably a differentiator. We're not a spray and pray, and we really work well and work hard with our companies to be successful.
I'm interested to know a little bit about the focus, and part of the reason why you're on the Fintech Australia podcast is that the Mendoza Ventures is focused on fintech and as you mentioned, AI and cybersecurity, and I would imagine some overlap with those three as well. I'm just interested, like fintech in its own right, financial technology or technology involved in financial services, etc. How do you define it? What do you see? And the industry in its own right's gone through a really sort of high highs and almost low lows. Can you talk about what you're seeing in your industry, in your world over in Boston?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Like you're correct. Like there were high highs, and that's a lot of it from the Tiger Globals of this world, and pushing high valuations and quick turnaround and stuff like that. But what we've seen is the B2C space of the financial services world that's been pretty much smashed. It's been hard. That customer acquisition cost, the capital. I think this is consistent for Australia too. What's your path to profitability? What's your growth? So we're really focused, and what we like at the moment is the B2B side. So it's the infrastructure side of financial services, and where you see traction is, the big banks, insurance companies, whatever, they're looking for ways to, save money, become more efficient, and just connect people a lot easier. So it's all about efficiencies and dollar savings as opposed to, spending money for customer acquisition.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. The B2B, let's talk, a little bit about that in the deep dive, not necessarily the portfolio companies that you're interested in, but maybe, the dynamics in the US versus Australia here. We've got 4 major big banks. We've got some regional banks. Talk about the US and what sort of plugins that businesses can do, and maybe there's white label opportunities.
Yeah, look, the reason you come to America is the market's massive, right? You're playing in the big league. So Australia's awesome. There's really good tech. It's capital efficient. And it's also built to be global from start, predominantly that's my view. That's what I've seen a lot of great Australian companies. But at some stage you have to make the leap and come to America. And this is the opportunity. I'd always say that you actually have to define who your market is and who your competitors are, because it's just too big. You really have to narrow it down. When it comes to fintech, it's really the East Coast of America. It's not Silicon Valley. It is New York is predominantly the one. Boston as well. Boston's more the asset management, wealth management side, but they are the 2 cities you need to look at. And then indicative of that is Andreessen, Horowitz, and Sequoia in the last 12 months, for the first time ever, set up New York offices specifically looking at fintech. So that tells you, where you need to be if you're going to make the leap to America. Obviously, New York, it's global capital center. You've got everyone from investment banks to commercial banks to insurers to hedge funds. They're all there. So, that's the opportunity there. So unlike Australia, where you have, the four big banks and a couple of regionals, here you've got probably 5 or 6 big American banks, probably the same equivalent. You've got the global banks, you've got the investment banks, and then, and then just on another level, you've probably got about 50,000 community banks. So there's a lot of opportunities. So you've really got to define what market you play in, who you're looking at.
And Scott, we've seen the establishment of corporate venture capital arms here in Australia by the big 4 banks. Are you seeing a little bit of interest in corporate venture capital over in the US?
Yeah, no, it's there, and they're always a good partner to a lot of companies. So the good thing about corporate ventures is they see it as, well, they're big companies. They've got problems. I know that they're not innovators, and they're really looking to buy solutions or be part of the solution. So for them, so if you're an entrepreneur and a fintech and you're looking to get into that side of, and ultimately you want to be acquired, you really got to work out how to be efficient, how to be able to plug and play into old core systems that, and take away that friction point. That's the key there. But over here, most big companies, all the Fortune 500s, they have CVCs. They're actually good to partner with. They'll never lead it around, but it's always good to know that if they're an investor side by side with you when you're in there investing.
Let's talk about the Australian-US relations, what we can do to improve that, what the process is in terms of maybe coming over and having a beer with you, and maybe even likewise, maybe the American fintechs going to Australia, even though it's probably counterintuitive, but there should be a bit more of a cross-connection, I'd imagine, for the greater good of the ecosystem globally.
Yeah, so look, I think as we mentioned before, Australians do look outward. They're built. A lot of people build fintechs to be global from the start. So it's really coming over here and having a go. But to do that, you need to have boots on the ground, and you really need to define your market. And most of that happens around the Series A to B stage when the growth capital, the tech works. You've got to pin your ears back and go for it. But what that means is it's super competitive here, right? It's all sales, marketing, and then the infrastructure end to support that. And then, that's where Australians don't like, traditionally we're just humble and tall poppy syndrome. We don't want to put ourselves out there. But over here, that's the starting point. You ask an American, they're awesome. It's very competitive. I've seen a lot of good Australian companies. The tech is way better, but it's who sells best. So, it's all about articulating a message in a clear, concise way, and just putting resources into that sales and marketing process and sales support. And that gets back to the fact too, fintechs, your money's, you've got to be careful with it. You can't be everyone for everything. So you've really got to define who your market is and what the opportunity is.
Being on the other side of the world and being near the epicenter of fintech globally, or arguably the epicenter of fintech globally, do you get a chance to come back to Australia and sort of keep some ties here, or are you sort of pretty wedded to being now on the East Coast?
Yeah, no, so look, I came back to Australia early this year. That was the first time since we moved 3 years ago, predominantly because we couldn't come home, but I'll always be back every 12 months. I'm a good, strong, proud Aussie. My family's still there, and I love, watching and see how the Australian ecosystem develops. I was at the Finnies Award, and that was a good night, and it was great to see
Fintech Australia
everyone
hosted
there.
Yep.
And that was fantastic. But I've also been part of Austrade trade delegations with Fintech Australia, and I was part of the May one. Well, I was on a panel talking about how to come to America and raise money, and also on a round table. I've also helped out Investment New South Wales on a webinar too for the same topic. And as I mentioned, I'm a proud Aussie, so I'm more than happy to help Australians come here and succeed. I get my satisfaction is actually seeing people do well and pay it forward, and we do have good opportunities in Australia, and half the time is just bit of luck and bit of grit and just go for it.
No, for sure. One final question before we leave it, Scott. We mentioned before about the roller coaster of the fintech ecosystem per se globally. You've got founders that may not have realised that the capital markets have dried up. There's a bit of toughness out there. There's a bit of grit. There's sort of a lot of companies that will be raising capital in 2023. What are you most excited about, I suppose, in 2023 for the fintech industry?
Yeah, it's really the ones that have a clear message and that infrastructure play. So, and they've got a solution that's easy, that takes away the friction. So, whether it's AI for banking systems where, they can predict credit scores or mortgages are going to refinance,
Yep.
That's just as an example. Our cybersecurity companies, they're flying. Obviously, that's been a strong point in Australia too.
Yeah, it has been. Yeah.
It's been lacking, and over here synthetic fraud is massive. So one of our portfolio companies, that's what they focus on. And, they're like the gold standard through the Federal Reserve in this. So cybersecurity, but it's really that intersection and what you mentioned before of all three, fintechs, cybersecurity and AI. AI is becoming more important, and there's so much data out there. It's actually sifting through the data and seeing what's relevant, which you can actually turn into, revenue streams or cost savings.
Yeah, no, great. Scott, thanks so much for doing the podcast today and talking about cross-border relations here in the in Australia and also the US, and it's good to hear an Australian accent sitting on the east coast of America and Boston, investing in fintech, which I think is needed globally, and the specialisation, which probably lacks a little bit here in the local markets. Really good to see. Mate, one last question, one small piece of advice for a founder that's sitting there going, oh, actually, I really wouldn't mind going to the US, but I have no idea where to begin.
You know what? There are good support systems. Austrade, the team there is pretty supportive, and it gets back to Fintech Australia. They do a great job. So reach out to, your Stuart Keens and the like, and they'll be able to point you in the right direction. I'm happy to, jump on a call for anyone and have any, give that advice. But you really you can't do it from afar. It's not something you can do from Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane. You need to come over here. So you really need to get over here, check it out, and just, scope out the opportunities and see what's there. There are resources there, so just grab them. Yeah,
mate. Thanks for that tip. That's really, really insightful. Really look forward to catching up in person at some point in time when you're back here, potentially for another Fintech Australia event next year. Congratulations on what you and Mendoza have achieved in terms of the Fintech vertical, as well as the fund performance over many, many years. So wish you all the best, and thanks very much.
Thanks, Chris. Been a great chatting.
Thanks for listening to the Fintech Australia podcast. I'm your host, Chris Titley. The Fintech Australia podcast is a collaboration between Fintech Australia and Sub11. For more information about membership options, news and the events coming up, jump on to the Fintech Australia website. Have a great day. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.